Chapter 1: A Tragic Discovery. The morning of July 26th started like any other in Rock Island. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a warm glow over the small town. The air was still, almost peaceful, as Fred Thompson, a local garbage collector, made his rounds. But as he approached the trash cans behind an old, dilapidated house on 21-2 Avenue, his routine was shattered. Lifting the lid of one of the cans, Fred stumbled back, dropping the lid with a loud clang. Inside, curled up as if in sleep, was the lifeless body of a child. The call came in at 7:42 a.m., and by 8, the scene was swarming with police. As the lead detective, I arrived shortly after, my mind already racing through possible scenarios. Child deaths are always the hardest cases to handle. They are fraught with emotions, and the pressure to find the perpetrator is immense. But as I looked down at the small body of Zion Staples, I knew this case would be different. This wasn't just a tragedy, this was something far darker. Chapter 2: The Initial Investigation. Zion's mother, Sushi Staples, was immediately taken into custody for questioning. Her reputation in the town was unremarkable. She was known as a hard-working single mother of 5, living quietly on the fringes of the community. But as I sat across from her in the cold, sterile interrogation room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sushi was distraught, her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. "I didn't do this," she repeated over and over, tears streaming down her face. "Zion was my baby. I would never hurt him." But as I pressed her for details, inconsistencies began to emerge. She mentioned an ex-husband and his new girlfriend, Tanya Williams, who had been harassing her for months. According to Sushi, Tanya was the one who wanted to destroy her, going as far as to make false accusations and even vandalize her property. It was an easy story to believe, a scorned woman out for revenge, but there was something in Sushi's eyes, a flicker of fear, that told me there was more to the story. Chapter 3: Digging Deeper. The first rule of any investigation is to follow the evidence, no matter where it leads. Sushi's story about Tanya Williams seemed plausible at first glance, but I knew better than to take anything at face value. As I dug into Tanya's background, it became clear that she was no stranger to trouble. She had a lengthy criminal record, mostly for fraud and identity theft. But there were darker rumors, whispers of involvement in human trafficking and exploitation. But what really caught my attention was a connection between Tanya and a shadowy group operating out of Chicago, specializing in forging identities and defrauding government agencies. It was a tangled web of crime, one that Zion might have been caught up in without even knowing it. My suspicions were further aroused when I discovered that Zion had been withdrawn from school months earlier, with no explanation. Neighbors reported that they hadn't seen him in weeks, maybe even months, before his body was found. The more I learned, the more it seemed that Zion's death was not just a tragic accident, but a deliberate act of violence, possibly to cover up something far more sinister. Chapter 4: The Breakthrough. Every case has a breakthrough moment, the point where everything starts to come together. For us, it came when we received an anonymous tip pointing us to an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The warehouse had long been a place of interest for law enforcement, rumored to be a hub for illicit activities, though we had never been able to pin anything on it. With a warrant in hand, we raided the warehouse, and what we found confirmed my worst fears. Inside, we discovered a trove of documents, fake IDs, birth certificates, and social security numbers, all connected to a network of children, including Zion. It became clear that Zion had been part of a larger operation, used as a pawn in a scheme to collect fraudulent benefits. But the most chilling discovery was the emails. A series of exchanges between Sushi and Tanya revealed a complex, twisted relationship. They had been working together, using Zion and other children to perpetrate fraud. But when Zion became too much of a liability, perhaps because he was old enough to start asking questions, they decided he had to go. Chapter 5: The Confrontation. Armed with the evidence, I returned to Sushi for a final interrogation. She sat across from me, her face pale and drawn. When I laid the evidence out before her, she broke down, her composure crumbling. "I didn't want to do it," she sobbed. "But Tanya, she pushed me. She said we needed more money, that we could get rich if we just played the game right. I didn't want to hurt Zion. I loved him, but it all got out of control." The confession was devastating. but it confirmed what I had suspected all along. Sushi had been a willing participant in the scheme, but she had also been manipulated, coerced into sacrificing her own child for the sake of money. It was a tragic, heartbreaking tale of desperation and greed, and it left me feeling hollow. Chapter 6. The Arrest and Aftermath. Sushi was arrested and charged with multiple counts, including fraud, conspiracy, and the murder of her own son. Tanya Williams, who had been the mastermind behind the operation, was also arrested and charged. The trial was swift, with the evidence so overwhelming that there was little room for doubt. Both women were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But despite the convictions, the case left a deep scar on Rock Island. The community, once so peaceful, was shaken to its core. Neighbors who had once prided themselves on looking out for one another now questioned how such a horrific crime could have happened right under their noses. For me, the case was a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors. As a detective, I had seen my fair share of crime, but this was different. This wasn't just about money or power, it was about the betrayal of a child's trust, the ultimate act of cruelty. In the months that followed, I couldn't shake the image of Zion's small, lifeless body, or the hollow look in Sushi's eyes as she confessed to her crimes. It haunted me, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the depths of human depravity. Chapter 7. Reflection. As the dust settled, I found myself reflecting on the case, trying to make sense of the senseless. How could a mother do this to her child? What drives a person to commit such an unspeakable act? The answers eluded me, as they often do in cases like this. But one thing was clear. Zion Staples had been failed by everyone around him, by the system that should have protected him, by the community that should have noticed his absence, and by the mother who should have loved him unconditionally. In the end, he was just another victim of a world that too often turns a blind eye to suffering. And so, life in Rock Island went on, but it was forever changed. The case of Zion Staples became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even in the most seemingly idyllic places, darkness can still take root. It's a story I will carry with me for the rest of my career, a reminder of why I do this job, to seek justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves, and to ensure that the innocent do not suffer in vain.